Your Excellencies, distinguished delegates, representatives of intergovernmental and non-governmental organizations, their colleagues and friends. I see a lot of friendly faces around the room. Ladies and gentlemen, good evening to those of us in the room here, and good day to the thousands that I understand are joining through live streaming. Chikemba is my name. I work here at FAO, where I serve as the Deputy Director of the Plant Production and Protection Division. It is a distinct honor and pleasure for me to welcome you to this side event on capacity sharing projects to support the global system. Just to state the obvious, this is jointly convened by the CGIAR Genebank Initiative and the Global Crop Diversity Trust. And the aim, dear friends, is for this plant germplasm conservation community of practice to share perspectives on areas where significant progress has been made, highlight outstanding needs, and hopefully articulate ways to set priorities going forward. And because we are here in FAO, if I may, I crave your indulgence to situate what we are doing in this event in the context of global development drivers, which shape the work that we do at FAO, and I would imagine the work that is done by a majority of us here. For those who may not be aware, the 2023 edition of the State of Food Security and Nutrition in the World, the so-called SOFI 2023, has just been published. And it found that hunger is on the rise in Western Asia, the Caribbean, and all sub-regions of Africa. And if you consider that 80% of the food that we consume on planet Earth are plant-based, you then understand and appreciate more the work that you do. Importantly, that plant genetic resources for food and agriculture is not just some abstraction. It plays these resources will help us in this march to be able to produce sufficiently enough food to feed people and be able to actualize the sustainable development goals. Charlotte had asked me, and I hope it's not a trick question, to provide a working definition of the global system for plant genetic resources for food and agriculture. And we've written about this quite a bit. However, in order to do her bidding, I'll try to read out what I wrote down. The global system on plant genetic resources for food and agriculture consists of a set of international policy instruments and mechanisms that are aimed at the promotion of the safeguarding, availability, and sustainable use of plant genetic resources for food and agriculture. And if we had more time, we could look at the historical perspectives, the evolution of the global system. But then suffice it to say that the development of the global system began in 1983 under the auspices of FAO with the establishment of the Commission on Plant Genetic Resources. Now the mandate has been broadened. It's now the Commission on Genetic Resources for Food and Agriculture. And for those who may be new to this community of practice, let me just mention these international agreements, the global instruments, the mechanisms, codes of conduct, standards, and guidelines. The international agreements, and I'll mention them in chronological order. The first was the International Undertaking on Plant Genetic Resources for Food and Agriculture, which was adopted by FAO's conference in 1983. And the underlying principle was that plant genetic resources for food and agriculture are a heritage of humankind and should be available without restriction. So this notion of availability has been there since the beginning of this the global system. Then, of course, there is the Convention on Biological Diversity, which came into force in 1992. The jury is out whether for this community of practice, the CBD enhanced or constrained access to plant genetic resources for food and agriculture. We are in this magnificent building under the auspices of the other agreement, and that is the International Treaty on Plant Genetic Resources for Food and Agriculture. The global instruments, we can trace this back to 1997 with the publication of the first report on the state of the world's plant genetic resources for food and agriculture. Then it was not called, there was no first in the title. However, because we now have a subsequent, at least we already have a subsequent one, so we add first to it. So the first report, which was published in 1997. And there was the Global Plan of Action, the Global Plan for the Conservation and Sustainable Utilization of Plant Genetic Resources for Food and Agriculture, which was adopted along with the so-called Leipzig Declaration in 1996. So since the first report, there has been the second report on plant genetic resources for food and agriculture, which was published again by FAO in 2010. We are now working on the draft third report. It has been considered, this draft has been considered by the last session of the commission. It is still work in progress. Then the Global Plan of Action was always conceived as a rolling plan that will be subject to periodic reviews. And following the publication of the second report in 2010, the GPA was revised to give us what we currently have as the internationally agreed framework for the conservation and sustainable use of plant genetic resources for food and agriculture. And that is the second Global Plan of Action for Plant Genetic Resources, which we call the second GPA. And then, of course, the global mechanisms include the Global Information System for PGRFA, which again continues to evolve. That includes the World Information and Early Warning Systems for Plant Genetic Resources, which we refer to as the views, and then of course the Genesis. There is also the International Network of ex situ collections, which I'm sure you'll be all quite familiar with. It used to be under the auspices of FAO. So the CGIAR centers signed an agreement with FAO in 1994, I believe, to hold these germplasm accessions in trust for the global community. But since coming into force of the international treaty, the agreement signed by the centers with the international treaty is what is operational now. And I would also, Charlotte and dear friends, I would also say that the Global Crop Diversity Trust also merits mention as part of this global system. The Global Crop Diversity Trust is mandated or is committed to providing funding for the management of these, for the safeguarding of the resources under the multilateral system in perpetuity. And we could go on and on. The codes of conduct, there was the code of conduct for germplasm collecting and transfer, and currently we have the gene bank standards, the associated practical guides to the gene bank standards, guidelines for developing national strategy for plant genetic resources, voluntary guide for national seed policy formulation, voluntary guidelines for the conservation and use of crop-wide relatives and wild plants, voluntary guidelines for the conservation and sustainable use of farmers' varieties and land races. So basically, these are things that are produced under the auspices of FAO's Commission on Genetic Resources for Food and Agriculture. So, and with this, I think I will sit back like the rest of you and listen to the speakers who I imagine have more interesting things to say. And I thank you also very much. But since I'm moderating, I'm also moderating this side event. I take pleasure, I exercise some license here, and I take pleasure in inviting my compatriot, Sunday, the director of the National Center for Genetic Resources and Biotechnology, NACGRAB, Nigeria, to provide your presentation. Sunday, please.
And other people viewing from across the globe. My perspective this evening is going to center on what are the outstanding issues, especially looking at the second global plan of action on plant genetic resources. By way of introduction, some progress have been made in pursuing the global plan of action on PGRFA in the last decade. However, there are some areas that we need serious attention in the coming years if plant genetic resources for food and agriculture is to achieve the necessary goals of achieving sustainable conservation and utilization across the world. This presentation is based on my perspective as a national gene bank operator. Building and strengthening plant genetic resources for food and agriculture networks. Looking at the global plan of action, this has not been really captured. Yes, there have been some pockets of networks across the world, but I will suggest, in the face of limiting resources, the following networks are very, very important. Number one, community networks on plant genetic resources. We're already talking about crop networks. This is more feasible and better if we want to conserve, especially ex situ, among the community, and this will involve farmers. Also, there is need for local areas. In some countries, we have local government areas, we have counties. These places, there should be community seed banks, and there is growing need, more than ever before, on the need for community seed bank, and this will involve farmer-based organizations and other people involved in agriculture within the community or within the local area. Then at state level, there should be a network between NGO, state ministry, agencies that are involved in plant genetic resources. And on a national level, there is need for a network of community, civil society organization, NARIs, government agency, universities, seed companies that are within that jurisdiction to have a network where they meet, where they discuss on issues relating to plant genetic resources. And then, of course, region also should have, as well as on a global level, like the chairman had just mentioned, their initiative started and then taken over by the treaty, which is coordinating all the gene banks. With the Gene Bank Initiative, a lot of achievements have been done, but I think the network needs to still be very strong. I go straight to the second point on the promotion of awareness on the importance of plant genetic resources. This is very, very important in the sense that without adequate promotion or awareness of the importance of genetic resources, many things will not be possible. Thanks to Crop Trust for the first Crop Diversity Summit, which was held last week. And with that single summit, where policymakers, civil society organizations met, it has really multiplied the, create more awareness, and there is now impetus for even government to fund plant genetic resources, because everybody is now aware that this is the, the solution to our food landscape, whether we like it or not. And this awareness should go to young people, farmers, legislators, policymakers, journalists, college students, and everybody should know that without this genetic, we all know a lot of things that we see on the electronic media, things that have no value for humanity. And these people have resources, money in the print media, in the social media. Why can't plant genetic resources also emulate and then have enough promotion? And how do we do this? Through electronic media, radio and television. Every day, there's nothing wrong in some of these things popping up in BBC, CNN, and even all other national television. Funding some of these things will make people to know that, the government will also know where they should put their resources. Number 3 is building and strengthening, number 3 is aggressive capacity building on PGRFA related activities. There's need for technical training for most of our gene banks. Thanks for the Seed for Resilience. I've been in the business of gene bank for 20 years, but what I've learned in the last 2 years, it's like I was wishing I was able to know those things in the last 10 years, because we are doing things blindly, and the same, especially in the less developed countries. Most of the things we just do try by error. But with the training we have received in the last 2 years, and thanks to Crop Trust, because this training involves female, it is gender sensitive, and it's also making sure that there is sustainability. Youth are involved. They make sure that we incorporate all the strata of, population to ensure that if I retire tomorrow, there are competent people to continue the conservation of genetic resources. And all the areas that are necessary are listed. The need for knowledge on seed biology, seed processing, seed health, regeneration, characterization, information and documentation. Now we are putting some things in Genesis. It's now dawned on us that for over 10 years, we are working without consciousness of the necessity of putting down information. Now we are scratching, looking for the information which are not there. And some of those things we have to go back to the field again, which is extra cost. So, but with proper training now, whatever genetic resources that is being conserved, we should have adequate information, because genetic resources without information, as it's been said, as we all are aware, is as useless as not available. But with adequate information, such genetic resources can be used. We need the knowledge of, management training also on how to handle resources, both human and material resources, knowledge of risk analysis, knowledge of quality management system, and knowledge of standard operation procedures. And then also there is need to understand the working of the treaty, of plant treaty, which will help in management. Lastly, there is need to support policy development on PGRFA for contracting parties. This will provide operational space to implement MLS and ensure sustainability of any national conservation and utilization strategies. Whereby this will make it to will make the countries to the policymakers to support the system. In conclusion, therefore, Mr. Chairman, there is need for strong network that will enhance resources management to the right audience. Awareness will promote sympathy from state, national authority, and donors for fundraising on PGRFA conservation. Awareness will also enhance understanding of stakeholders and legislators for policy formulation. Capacity building will enhance standardization across the globe. Also, it will ensure information sharing, which will be on the same platform. Also policymaker, it will also, policy, if we promote policy, we support policy, it will ensure sustainability of funding by government. Not that one government will fund and then another government will not fund, but when there is policy there, then there will be stability of the system. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Sunday, for making that compelling case for networks at various scales, the imperative of awareness creation, capacity building, and policies for the enabling environment. Thank you again, Sunday. Our second speaker is Monsieur Pierre du Plessis of the Africa Union. Pierre, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just a clarification, I work as an advisor to the African Union Commission. I'm not a staff member, and what I'm saying here is in my personal capacity. And also, I am one of the strange people in this process who is not a gene bank manager or very formally involved in my day job in the management of PGRFA. But I have for a very long time worked with communities on the ground with traditional farming resources and traditional farming systems, and I bring that perspective to the global system, which I find some echoes in my previous speaker as well, but I would like to contribute specifically on that because to me that is one of the main weaknesses in the current system. Firstly, I think that in the current system, there's not enough acknowledgement of the traditional knowledge, and more especially the indigenous ecological wisdom of farmers on the ground. And although there's an increasing debate around farmers' rights and about the importance of land races and farmers' varieties and farming management seed systems, I do not see that well integrated into the systems thinking that I believe the global system has to do, especially in the face of accelerating climate change. So we talk about climate change, we recognize the importance of PGRFA for climate change adaptation, but actually in the system, there is still, in my view, a lack of the closing the circle, is the metaphor that occurs to me, right? Where it's no longer about the traditional varieties in the area where they were evolved and selected by farmers. It's about what are those farmers going to need in 10 years, 20 years, 30 years' time under the increasing impacts of climate change when their traditional varieties no longer keep up with the environmental conditions. When that accelerated evolutionary process that they've brought about in their husbandry and in their stewardship of those resources can no longer keep up with the pace of change. And one of the things I would suggest the system needs to do is it needs to take traditional varieties from one area and share them with the same kind of communities in the next climate zone, to put it very simply. So exchange, not just community seed banks, but exchanges between community seed banks in various areas, I think is a very important part of that. Of course, there's a role in that for the gene banks and for the global system to collect those varieties, safeguard them against extinction, evaluate them for field trials, maybe using genetic technologies to characterize them, to spot adaptations in those local varieties that might be valuable on a global level. I also think that the global system, and in that I would particularly be looking at the seed industry, should take responsibility for not displacing local diversity by introducing improved or better, improved seeds. There should be a responsibility never to displace a local variety without collecting it, putting it back into the system. Because farmers will eagerly adopt improved seeds, because farmers are not there to conserve, they're there to make a livelihood, make money out of farming. So you cannot look at them as your first and frontline conservators. So when the seed industry goes out, introduces improved seeds into an area, they should have a moral and arguably a legal obligation to also collect what they will be displacing, right? And bring that into the system so it can go into gene banks and can be characterized and can be made available to other people. Again, I think that the focus is still too much on already domesticated crops, even if those are new and neglected and underutilized species, because there are far many more wild species that are potentially very important for food security that are not currently, to the best of my understanding, really covered in the system. Okay, so NACGRAB has some work on that, and of course it is a long-term project because of the time it takes for trees to grow and produce and so on. But I think a much better focus on agroecology in the sense of layered stacking of perennial plants and annuals in food systems is an important part of adaptation to climate change and of disaster risk reduction. Right? We all know that perennials are better able to survive the kind of rainfall we're getting now, where maybe the total rainfall is increasing, but the dry periods in between are also getting longer, and annuals simply can't bridge that gap. Right? I mean, in northern Namibia, people grow the most drought-resistant crops in the world, and we're beginning to see that now, right? So pearl millet, once it's germinated, it can survive 28 days without rain. If it's that size, it's got a root like that size, it will be fine. But 40 days will kill it in those sandy soils. Right? And when that happens, people fall back on their perennials. They fall back on the deep-rooted plants that will produce food as long as there's a minimum amount of rain every year. When you introduce that into farming systems, you can also supplement that with strategies like water harvesting, water harvesting basins, higher plantings for flood events, and so a much more ecosystem integrated, holistic approach to what you need to put into a landscape in terms of PGRFA to help people to not only survive, but achieve food security and nutritional diversity and all of those things. And then I want to go back to something I mentioned right at the start, right? But I want to first refer to something you said in your opening remarks. You said it started in 1983 with the international undertaking. In fact, of course, it started with colonialism and the Columbian exchange and plant genetic resources being collected from all over the world and taken all over the world. That is the underlying fundamental reason for our international interdependence for PGRFA. So, sugarcane from India to the Americas, the maize to Africa, all the European crops to the the exchange as well as I do, and probably better. But that is what connected us. That is what made us all reliant on everyone else's genetic resources to a very large extent. And in doing that, that colonial system also replaced a very crucial part of what was the indigenous ecological wisdom that helped us in the Holocene to develop a farming system, and in Anthropocene is under real threat of breaking down completely. And that's the interrelatedness, the mutual interdependence, the relationality, the ecosystem thinking, and the importance of local diversity. And I would really want the global system to take that into account much more thoroughly and systematically than it currently does. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Pierre, for sharing these perspectives. I think the emphasis on traditional knowledge, indigenous knowledge, farmers' varieties, land races, and bringing all those together in the context of food security and nutrition and adaptation to climate change. All these are well noted. You make a case for the coexistence of perennials and annuals in landscapes, and I think that would resonate. Let us talk about the issue of colonialism as the foundation for our interdependence on plant genetic resources for food and agriculture on another day. Okay, thank you. And with that, I take pleasure in inviting Sarada Krishnan, the Director of Programs at the Global Crop Diversity Trust, to address us. Sarada, please.
Thank you, Chikelu, and thanks for having me here today. And I think Chikelu and all of the previous speakers have really set the stage of how the evolution of all the elements of the global system. And I'm going to talk about the Crop Trust and our work in building the global system and what the needs are from our national partners. We had a consultation last week with the national partners and our international partners, and we identified what the needs are from our national partners and what might be some considerations for prioritization of these needs. So this is a visualization of what a global system could look like. And I think we can start from the bottom. We started with the community collections because it is so important, the farmers' collections, conservation in situ and on the farm. And then about that is the national collections, and then the international collections, and the ultimate safeguard of our crop diversity is the Svalbard Global Seed Vault. Because if anything happens, that is where it is safeguarded that we can all retrieve our genetic resources from. So all of these are important because as part of the global system, I mean, and there are these policy mechanisms and other instruments that connect all of these together. And the community seed banks, we need to get into the habit of making sure that they are backed up in national collections, and the national collections with the CG centers, the international gene banks, and then finally the second level of safety duplication at the Svalbard Global Seed Vault. And so as part of our building the global system, what we do is we support gene banks. We provide long-term grants for international collections that are under the Article 15 and to the Svalbard Global Seed Vault. And we also, as one of the gene banks that we've been working with, an Article 15 collection is the Cartier Gene Bank, the coffee collection, for the rescue and rejuvenation of the coffee collection, a project with the treaty. And as you may have heard in the plenary these past few days, we also provide emergency reserve funds in collaboration with the treaty as part of the BOLD project. And so far we have given emergency reserve funds to Yemen, Laos, Sudan, and Cuba. And also as part of our building the global system, we provide system-wide services. We provide system-wide services in quality management systems. So we provide workshops, what we call the GOAL workshop, Gene Bank Operations and Advanced Learning. We provide QMS intensives and also community of practice. We have an audit program, and also bi-monthly we offer this Gene Bank resource on the web webinar series. And all of these we do in collaboration with the CG centers, because the CG centers have the expertise to provide these webinars and these workshops. And so we tap into the expertise from all of these international gene banks to help support capacity building at national gene banks. And also the Gene Bank Information System, as part of our system-wide services, we have two different database management systems that we offer. The Genesis is an external facing system where you can upload your passport data, images, and documents, and you can have subsets within your and different data sets, and you can aggregate data by country, crop, gene bank or PGRFA networks. And you can search across gene banks, download data, accession maps, and you can find accessions using climate data and finding similar accessions. And also users can request material from Genesis. And the GRIM Global Community Edition is a gene bank operational management tool, which to manage and maintain the data of every plant genetic resource in the gene bank collection, and it assists curators and managers in prioritizing activities, and also makes available current and accurate data to curators and technicians. So these are two systems that, two of the databases that we help operate. And then a couple of projects that we are doing with national gene banks. We have the BOLD project that you all have heard about. From the plenary this morning. And this is strengthening national gene banks. The work package 1 is to strengthen partner national gene banks. And we are working with 15 national partners to help them manage, document, conserve, safety, duplicate crop diversity, and make it available for farmers and breeders. And then the work package 4 in BOLD is safety duplication at the Svalbard Global Seed Vault. And so we currently have 43 partners in 30 countries. And so as part of this project, we have provided training as well as equipment for multiplication, regeneration, processing of seeds, and for viability testing, and then safety duplication. And then the other project is the Seeds for Resilience project, which is, and the BOLD project is funded by the government of Norway and NORAD, and the Seeds for Resilience is funded by the German government. And this is, we are working with 5 countries, and Nigeria is one of them: Ethiopia, Ghana, Kenya, Nigeria, and Zambia. And here also we provide safeguarding the national seed collections, and also we have a link with farmers to ensure that farmers have access to these collections. And so last week in Berlin, when we had the Global Crop Diversity Summit, the day after the summit, we held consultations with national partners with our international CG partners to identify by region what are the capacity needs of the gene banks. And these are some highlights, some key points that came out of that discussion there. And a lot of it was training on basic gene bank operations so that they can reach international standards. And then there was a request that the training be done to technicians and not just management. And capacity needs for in vitro and other forms of conservation, as well as capacity in standard operating procedures, quality management system, data management, and capacity in policy. And identifying germplasm duplicates and gaps. And once projects are finished, to create a way to continue capacity building beyond the project timeline, and equipment and infrastructure needs and succession planning. And also collaboration, how can collaboration happen between national and international gene banks was joint collecting missions, joint germplasm characterization and evaluation, and clear mapping of actors and their needs, and also the mapping of CG actors and their services, and what are the avenues of collaboration, and safety duplication, and then as well as joint proposal writing for grants. And then this was the prioritizing some of the capacity needs. And so these was, these are at random order that came up, and then doing a needs assessment at a national and regional level, and could be through gene bank reviews as well as peer reviews, and then intervention at regional level as well as coordination between national gene banks and cross-regional collaboration. It's also valuable. And in the absence of regional networks, the CG centers can serve as facilitator of regional coordination, and incentivizing young professionals to join agricultural careers. And then the crop conservation strategies can serve as an entry point for identifying which crops, prioritizing crops for conservation. And this was an interesting thing that came out, is an institute a global plan of action for gene banks, periodically report on gaps and needs in a centralized way so that actions and events can be planned accordingly. And then also raising awareness with national governments on the importance of conservation. So that is one of the things we do with our projects, is also capacity build on communications, so that way they can bring more visibility to the projects within their own countries. So these are the capacity needs, and so I will stop at that. And thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Sarada. I find that pyramid presentation of the hierarchical order, if you may, of gene bank conservation quite interesting, and one that we will have to look at further. So yes, the Global Crop Diversity Trust is doing impressive work, and you've done very well to capture them. The BOLD project, the Seed for Resilience. I do think that the capacity needs are things that merit further conversation as to how we could amplify them and see mechanisms for addressing them. We have time constraints, and Geoff Hawtin, who is joining us remotely, will be the next speaker.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to have a chance to address you all. What I was asked to do was to come in and perhaps summarize a little bit of the presentations. Unfortunately, I have to leave shortly, so I will not be able to include Charlotte's presentation in what I'm about to say. But I was also asked to give a few thoughts on the topic of my own. So maybe just a few thoughts and briefly. Clearly, when we talk about a global system, what is a global system for? It's a system for sharing the resources, both the germplasm itself and data, and sharing the benefits of that. Everybody should have an opportunity to contribute. Everybody who should have an opportunity to benefit from such a system. It needs to be a two-way flow. And the basis of any such system has to be the sharing of capacity. The different institutions, parts of the system have different capacities, and it's extremely important, I think, to be able to build on the on one's strengths, and in a rational system, there would be a very clear division of labor. That will depend on what an institutional's objectives are, what its history is, what its mandate is, and what its capacity is. But I think the system, and we've heard a bit today about the system, it's not just a conservation system, although conservation is clearly a part of it. If the system is going to be effective, it's got to be able, and if it's going to give real benefits, and not just to the institutions involved, but also ultimately to the farmers and consumers who we all serve, it has to be a system that also promotes use. Now, we're not clearly a plant breeding system per se, but I think it's absolutely critical, if we're going to be successful, that we don't become an inward-looking gene bank, let's conserve it all system, but that we're an outward-looking, let's reach out to farmers, let's reach out to private breeders, let's reach out to the general public, let's hear what the consumers want, and so on. So it has to be an active and alive and an outward-looking global system. We heard a lot about the need for policies, the need for public awareness, I think is absolutely critical in this, and is part of that whole outreach, I think, side of what has to be the global system. We just heard areas, a whole series of areas in which sharing capacity can be extremely important, and I won't go into those, but Sarada mentioned quite a number of different areas which the Crop Trust is particularly working in terms of building and sharing capacity. And I think that those are all very important. And of course, there are many other areas too that I think would benefit from a significant capacity sharing. Sharing capacities that perhaps the stronger institutions or the weaker institutions, or two institutions with different strengths and weaknesses working together. Yes, so networking. We heard in particular from Sunday the extreme importance of networking. Networking in various capacities really underlines, I think, the whole of the global system. Without networking, the system doesn't hold together. There's no glue. And the networking, of course, can occur at many different levels. We're talking about national networks. We heard from Pierre the importance of community seed banks working together so that they can share materials, perhaps across different environments in anticipation of new environments as a result of climate change. Networks at that level, networks at the national level, involving perhaps universities, gene banks, plant breeders, farmers, farmer organizations, NGOs, and others working together. There's likewise a whole series of networks needed at the international level, where countries can work together and share materials. And some of the international institutions perhaps have particular roles to play in long-term things like long-term conservation, in distributing materials, in building networks for materials to flow among countries. Regional organizations likewise, and perhaps have a particular role to play in linking with national programs with their sort of language capabilities and so on, which often are missing at the international level when, as in meeting today, we're all relying on English. So we've heard about capacity building, capacity sharing, and I think these are absolutely critical. But what actually is the glue? What holds it all together? What makes a network effective? And to me, there's a number of things that really have to be in place before any of these networks, sub-networks, multiple sub-networks working at different levels within the global system, for them most effectively through opportunities to meet face-to-face. There's no substitute actually for meeting face-to-face. I'm addressing you here from the interactions But who's going to situation? One partner often has more to gain, perhaps, than the other. And yet it's often the weaker of the two partners that has the least resources available to put into that partnership. So how are we going to resource these networks, these activities? And I think what we've just heard from the Global Crop Diversity Trust is very encouraging in this respect, and hopefully the whole issue of resources is something which will be addressed further, and that further resources will be made available. Perhaps a note that to finish on, all of this really only holds together in an atmosphere of trust. I've followed this whole development right back from the early days, the early 90s, when the negotiations for the international treaty first began. And we've gone through periods of great distrust when things have been extremely difficult. And I think I've watched over that period, over the sort of the last essentially 30 years, trust slowly building. I think opportunities today for working together exist that perhaps were certainly not there, in fact, 30 years ago. And I think the more we realize that we're in the boat together, we're facing a very difficult future. We've got massive challenges ahead, and we have to work together. That is the only way ahead. And the only way that we can work together is if we learn to trust each other. So I think with that, I thank you very much for your attention, and I hand back to the chairman. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Geoff, for ending on that optimistic note of trust. Now we will pivot to Charlotte. Charlotte Lusty is the Senior Director of the CGIAR Genebank Initiative. Charlotte.
Thank you very much. Lusty is lost. I'm very grateful you're all still here. Thank you very much. Let's do this. So I want to say a few words about our capacity building work at CGIAR. So the Genebanks Initiative is the current vehicle that is the framework through which the CGIAR Genebanks are funded. It's a 3-year initiative that is part of a 9-year cycle of work. And the nature in which we're working in the CGIAR is we're never completely sure of the budget until the actual year of implementation. And so we don't have that kind of luxury of a project cycle where you know that you can enter into a partnership with national partners over a specific period of time. So we work very opportunistically in a way, and that actually brings positives as well as negatives. It means that we grasp any opportunity to bring in national partners, and we use every opportunity to involve them in our own training workshops, in our own communities of practice, and we tailor what we are doing often to specific regions and specific partners. So while it looks somewhat of a scattered approach, I think sometimes it really is a very effective way of working. And when you start looking at the numbers, it adds up. So in 2022, 57 workshops, 625 people from more than 50 countries. And by 2023, we're actually sharing our financial resources with more than 28 countries, not including the host countries in which the CGIAR collections are located. In some cases, that's a very small amount of money, but nevertheless, we're finding every opportunity to buy equipment, to help dry seeds, to do anything that's required when it's required. That's the way we work. And I won't go through this entire list, but you can see that we're working in different domains, different themes. We're working in networks, we're working in crop networks, in regional networks, and we also have the opportunity to work with the Crop Trust. When they have projects, it means we can come in and bring technical backstopping in a very opportunistic way. So that is the nature of the way we work. And just to give you a little more in-depth introduction, I mean, this is some of our partners from this year. We targeted national partners that had expressed specific needs in the compliance reports that were submitted to the treaty, and we attempted to address the needs they'd expressed in those reports. We also had a method of finding out which countries are the least represented in ex situ collections and targeted them as part of the same process. So there's a very active process of attempting to find those that are least or in most need. And I wanted to highlight particularly the work we're doing on a larger scale in networks. There is, in particular, a strong difference between what we do with African networks compared with what we might do with Latin American networks. So we have, and I'm going to go into a little bit more detail. There's also, and we have the person who set up effectively the network called MusaNet, which is the banana and plantain research network. He's with us here, Nicolas Roux. So that's another slightly different approach. But looking at the Latin America community of practice was a very different approach to the African one. It started with a needs assessment, and then it looked at actually the materials in the collection and what has been genotyped. And they went a step further, looking at specific crops from specific countries, and they actually started genotyping some of the materials and have come up with some neat data. So this is a community of, actually I missed how many countries it was. This is beans, working with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 countries. 480 accessions, all genotyped with the same platform, and starting to share the pattern of beans, genetic diversity in ex situ in collections in that area. And you're starting to see patterns, the Andean versus the Mesoamerican bean diversity, which collections are approximately, which collections are have similar patterns of diversity, and possibly 1 or 2 mixes, as you can see. If you have the time to look at this, I'm sure we'll make the slides available if you're interested. So this is an area where a group is working together, and the benefits are coming to NARS in particular, in setting where their gene banks compare with others in the region, as well as bringing in modern tools and facilitating the analyses within a reasonable cost. So similarly, at a group level, you're starting to look across a continent at how well bean diversity is being conserved, and potentially stimulating the flow of germplasm across countries. So this was a slightly new approach, thanks to an opportunity of being able to fund this, and having a center that is in the center of diversity for beans, able to come up with a creative and interesting project for the partners they know well. So I think this is where I'm turning our situation into a positive. And I also wanted to share with you the very new approaches coming out of the reform CGIAR, particularly in accelerated breeding. They're adopting a much more participatory approach. And have systematically gone around national partners to assess their, to assess their, not only their needs, but their priorities. And it is together with partners, national partners, that they are agreeing the priorities for the breeding that then goes on in accelerated breeding. So there's a much more mixed approach to breeding, and national partners are brought in at a much earlier point in the cycle of the breeding cycle. So in effect, capacity strengthening is an intrinsic part now of the way CGIAR conducts its work. And there are many different ways to do this capacity building and sharing. And I think we're at a point where we really need to be more strategic. There are limited resources, and there are ways of us to combine efforts. And this is something the Crop Trust and the CGIAR have been talking about on the course of this year, but I think we've still got some way to go, and we need to talk to this community to find out ways of making the most of the limited resources we have, doing more online, making more things available to a larger audience, doing more in networks, doing more in thematic networks, regional networks, crop networks, and then working out where we need to work one-on-one with individuals that need more help. So I think that's really wrapping it up as fastly as I can, and thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Charlotte. Unfortunately, Geoff isn't able to bring his very bright intellect to bear upon a summary of Charlotte's presentation. But I think you would agree that it's commendable how she's been able to showcase this extensive portfolio of interventions of the CGIAR Genebank Initiative, and I think it's quite clever also to have been able to dovetail those with the work of the Global Crop Diversity Trust, and you know, basically underscoring the global system as we started off with. And I find it also particularly interesting that you are adopting a region-specific approach to the management of plant genetic resources for food and agriculture. And importantly, I think the linkage, fostering this linkage to breeding, the sustainable use component. Charlotte gave us an example. I'm sure there are several, but she gave as an example the CGIAR Accelerated Breeding Initiative, which goes beyond the conventional notion of breeding to even encompass seed delivery systems. And just as all the other speakers have said, I find it particularly interesting and illuminating that a recurring theme seems to be capacity, the need to strengthen capacity at different levels, at different scales, and the uncertainty of funding notwithstanding. So thank you very much, Charlotte. So we have a slot for question and answers, but I don't know how well we are doing with time. How much longer are we able to continue? It would be a shame if we don't take any questions at all.
Yeah, Chike, I think we've got till midnight, haven't we?
Okay. So we now have the time for questions and answers. I would propose that we take a first set of questions. Show by raise of hand if you want to make a comment or to pose a question, introduce yourself, and if possible, let me know to whom you want to address your intervention. Yes, to Luigi.
Thank you. My question is for Pierre. I was very interested in your comment about the movement of land races from one climatic zone to another. And that movement could also be from one cultural group to another. And I was wondering whether there are any good models for governing the movement of traditional knowledge across cultures in that way that could be used to facilitate that movement.
Okay, there's a question and a comment online. The comment from Beatrice Akeza from Kampala, Uganda. The emphasis on not replacing indigenous and local varieties when introducing improved varieties and focusing on increasing diversity of plant genetic resources for food and agriculture that can be accessed is key. I therefore think that messaging and communication that accompanies the process of introducing and promoting improved and new varieties is very important. So that's picking up on something that Pierre said, a comment. And then a question from Bugma Ali saying, genetics and plant breeding at Burkina Faso. What strategy to conserve plant genetic resources in Sahel countries in security crises?
Thank you, Michael. Pierre, the question from Luigi and from Beatrice online will go to you.
Thanks, Luigi, for the trick question. Well, I mean, you know, people who know a lot more about TK than I do, like people who actually study it and so on, they constantly insist on this, the fact that although it's traditional knowledge doesn't mean that it's static, right? That it keeps evolving. And of course, in the colonial experience, we have many examples of the colonizers picking up the traditional knowledge and in a way, adapting it or improving on it or assimilating it and cross-fertilizing it. And, I mean, for example, you know, my settler ancestors in Africa learned how to use rooibos tea from the indigenous Khoi-San people in the Cape. But they then had the global connections to turn that into a new crop and create a world market for it. And I think that, you know, also, I mean, Africa, which is really the area that I know, when you had the migration of the Bantu-speaking peoples out of the Sahel region, along with all of the Sahelian domesticates, you know, they kind of adapted them and selected them for different climate zones as they went down. And that process is still not completely finished. In Namibia, there's sort of a 150-kilometer zone where in wet periods, people bring those crops and they farm them, and then in droughts, they retreat back to safer, more fertile grounds for them. So I think there, I don't know if there are models per se. You would have to ask a social anthropologist. But I think there's ample evidence that people do learn from one another, and with an open attitude to sharing and, you know, being in the trouble together, as Geoff pointed out. If we did more of that, relational interaction and respectful exchanges, maybe we will eventually have some best practices.
Pierre, and then relating to the narrative surrounding, you know, the replacement of farmers' varieties and land races with improved varieties. Right. I think there is a note of caution there.
Yeah, I mean, we all know that happens, right? I mean, seed companies introduce improved varieties into areas. They are a miracle to the farmers who buy them. They're so much more productive. Farmers vote with their money, you know, for that particular variety. But in the process, neglect their traditional varieties, simply leave them behind. Not always, of course. And I think there are a couple of things you can do about it. You know, like in Europe, for example, now, where you have an almost infinite choice of seeds and you have subsidies and so on, many people are conserving growing traditional varieties as a hobby. It's like a point of pride, right? You have seed saver networks and people will grow a small piece of land under traditional varieties, or will even grow them commercially because there's a market demand for heirloom vegetables and that sort of stuff. I think more awareness raising amongst farmers in developing countries about the value and the pride that they can have in the fact that they own these adapted varieties, and some encouragement to not abandon them completely, even if you switch your main cropping to more productive commercial varieties. My personal bugbear there is that very often farmers are not aware of the fact that the F1 seeds they buy will not breed true to type, and it's not explained to them. Right? I'm not at all against hybrid seeds, but you should make it very clear to people that once you've bought the F1, you're never going to be able to save the seeds from that and get what you paid for again. That's just deception in a way.
Okay, thank you, Pierre. I think that is a nuanced conversation that needs to be had, but what I'm hearing is it is unlikely that farmers will just grow varieties from some altruistic motive of diversity. There has to be some incentive, or in the more affluent countries, as a hobby. So the one has to balance the need for farmers to be gainfully employed in what they do, and then this imperative of on-farm diversity. It's not a dialogue.
Farmers do also grow traditional varieties out of choice, especially for taste and processing characteristics.
Yes, but it will hardly be for just maintaining genetic diversity. Okay, Charlotte?
Yeah, so a country in crisis wishing to ensure the gene bank is working has a long life, should definitely be safety duplicating, number one. So safety duplicate seeds as best you can. In terms of finding ways to conserve seeds at low cost, that is perfectly possible. And we should do a better job of indicating how to do this. I think we were in a similar side event at the Commission, and there is a desperate need to show standards in effect for lower cost methods, not for long-term conservation, but for any form of conservation. And I think we can do that. I think there's a lot of material, and it's drying seed, putting it in a sealed container can go a long way. And I think that's something we need to encourage and show the best possible ways of doing that. There are some easy wins. So low-cost methods, safety duplication. If you can go a step further, then talk to the community, talk to people who are conserving seeds in the region, talk to your local CGIAR center, talk to the Crop Trust. There's a lot of us around, and we're all very keen to provide the help we can.
Yes, thank you, Charlotte. I think the specific question was about conserving seeds in the Sahel, conserving germplasm in the Sahel. But it's basically the same thing, as you have said. Engage with the community of practice, the CGIAR Center, the Global Crop Diversity Trust, if you can. And then, of course, the FAO country office. You know, there is no reason why there couldn't be a technical cooperation project, for instance, at least to commence activities. Okay, and then we'll take another set. Madam?
My name is Gloria. I'm from the Alliance of Bioversity International and CIAT. Mine is a comment or perhaps a trick question, depending on how you interpret it. I'm seeing today lunchtime, I attended another side event on how to link the crop trust's work with treaty implementation. And I'm seeing that there is a lot of capacity development going on here. And I'm wondering if we are able to quantify it in terms of impacts and that now count it as non-monetary benefit sharing so that it can directly contribute to treaty implementation, and so that you know, countries from the south can actually see that benefit sharing is actually taking place in other forms. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam. Then to Michael.
My question's, first for Charlotte, Sarada, and yourself, GK. And then I'd also like to get reflections from Sunday and Pierre, if you have it. First, the first three of you are in an extraordinarily privileged position to be working for organizations that have money to provide support for capacity building. So let's say tomorrow you got $10 million for capacity building. The whole world needs capacity. All the countries, in the upstairs will say they need money for this or that. Where do you turn? How do you make an informed decision about where you're going to spend that money? And then, having said that, to those for Sunday and Pierre, if you have reflections on how do you think they should be doing that, that would also be fine. Thanks.
Charlotte, Sadar, and then I'll see if there is something that I can
Maybe
say.
we could work it out together. Okay.
Yes,
Okay.
we could do that.
Okay, we have 10 million, Chike.
Yes.
We want to hit a large audience, right? So we do some stuff at a large scale, we do some stuff at a small scale. That was the theme of my talk. Do you think that's a good idea?
Yes.
Yes. They haven't got much choice, have they? Chike, do you have any thoughts on that? Do we do a mixed approach or do we do a magic bullet?
I'm afraid my response is going to be maybe even simpler. We are a member organization. What we do reflects the requests that we receive from our members. We have mechanisms for receiving those requests from members. I guess one that will be quite relatable will be the international treaty, but then also the Commission on Genetic Resources for Food and Agriculture. But then there is also a more practical one, and that is what we call the country programming framework. So we're able to ascertain priorities based on what countries have identified as their priorities. So we're actually now in the process of planning for the next biennium. So if you gave me 10 million today, is timely. Thank you.
So, Chike, you'd use the instruments that you so well described at the beginning and identify the needs, and would you have another meeting to work out the priorities, or do you think they're sufficiently tuned for you to decide how to spend your 10 million?
No, yes, on a conceptual level, the requests that we receive, say from the Commission or the governing body of the international treaty, do not carry that level of minutiae. So there would have to be further layers of consultation in order to establish priorities. And such consultative processes would entail engaging with our partners.
Would it be countries recipient, or would you think of things at some global level things, or regional? Could you imagine that being part of the solution?
Yeah, all of them.
Okay, so we're not so different.
Yeah.
We should also think about crop level.
Right.
Because there are gaps in crop diversity, and those that are not targeted, I think there should be some crop level decision making as well.
But we only have 10 million.
Yes.
We can't have a workshop costing 500,000 to get us to the priorities. I hope.
Need some baseline survey of the need assessment, as it's been mentioned, because it's from, and that need assessment you could get from existing networks. Some have been crying, if they have this, some of them, if they have 1 million, they can do a lot with it in capacity building on other areas. Then by the time you harvest all those information, then you'll be able to spend, even you will request for more, I believe.
Will this be about right?
Michael, is your question answered?
Okay. Good. Yes. And yeah, I think we can bring this to a close gradually.
You want to know what I would do with 10 million? I would do something that has never been tried before. Because I think that is one of the limitations of the system, which is what I was trying to get across, right? I mean, gene bank managers want more money for gene banks and for training gene bank managers and technicians. But the system needs that loop closed, right? It needs to, I think Geoff also referred to that, right? It needs a better mechanism for having an impact. I think it's a bit what Gloria was asking as well. The system works well, there's good intentions there, and there's resources there, and there are skills there. But I don't think that it is having the impact on the ground that it can have with a little bit more systems thinking about how do you transfer things to the ground level. And that's what I would spend it on.
Okay. So, yes, I do think, just as I figured, we were never going to, have a definitive closure to this. What is clear is plant genetic resources for food and agriculture. They need to be conserved. They need to be conserved properly. They need to be used. And the benefits that arise from using them need to be shared equitably and fairly. And we have our work cut out for us, whether it is somebody working in the national system, in an intergovernmental process such as myself, or international organizations. The time, the sense of urgency, I think implies that we all need to do our best to conserve these resources and to use them in ways that demonstrably contribute to solving people's problems. For instance, to feed everyone adequately on planet Earth. And with that, I think, friends, ladies and gentlemen, join me in thanking the Global Crop Diversity Trust and the CGIAR Genebank system for putting this together. If you invite us another day, be sure that we will be answering your call. Thank you all very much.